Yeah, so I'm going to talk to you this evening about the Carbon Landscape Citizen Science Project. But before I get into the detail on the project itself, I just wanted to give you a bit of information about the geography. Um, Now, the Carbon Landscape area is part of a much wider area, which is called the Great Manchester Wetlands. It's great, not greater, because it doesn't just include bits of Greater Manchester, it includes bits of Warrington as well. So this we refer to it as the GM Wetlands Nature Improvement Area, and this red line shows you the area of the NIA. So as you can see, geographically, it's very important because it sits between these two really big conurbations. So you've got Liverpool, Merseyside to the west, and you've got Manchester to the east, and or Greater Manchester, should I say. And as we'll see, this is a really key, it's an area of really key importance for many species, and it acts as a corridor, you know, for species to move between these two conurbations. So very important area. We've got lots of wildlife sites. We've got special areas of conservation, sites of special scientific interest, local nature reserves, and also local wildlife sites. So down here in Warrington, you know, we've obviously got sites like Holcroft Moss, Risley Moss, Worston Eyes, which are of international and national importance for species. So a very important area. Up here in the northwest in Wigan, we've got the Wigan flashes, we've got the Abram flashes, triple SI as well. So the GM Wetlands is a partnership. Lots of different organisations have come together to work on this landscape, and you'll obviously recognise a few of them down here, local to yourselves. We've got Cheshire Wildlife Trust, Warrington Borough Council, but there are lots of other organisations involved, as you can see from this list here. Okay, so what exactly is the purpose of the NIA? I don't, a lot of people probably have heard of the Lawton report, which was published in 2010, and this recommended, in order to sort of halt the decline in biodiversity in this country, to set up these nature improvement areas that would allow conservation action across a landscape. So the initial bid round, we were unsuccessful, so we decided to basically just go ahead with this ourselves and seek funding from other sources, which I'll come on to later. But the main objectives of the NIA are to improve species mobility, to mitigate the impacts of climate change, for example. We're making sort of improvements to rare habitats, so there's a lot of restoration going on of lowland raised bog sites like Risley Moss, Little Walden Moss, where we're working, you know, to improve the habitats. We're also creating stepping stones across the landscape. So, for example, Pest for Long Moss, there's been some work done to restore the bog there, to create a stepping stone between Risley Moss and Holcroft Moss. So all this work's going on by the restoration team to basically improve the landscape for species and to allow species to move across the landscape. So in terms of the geography, yeah, we've just looked at this is the wider GM Wetlands NIA. So it does take in quite a big chunk of Warrington. And if we move on to the carbon landscape itself, that should allow me to give you a better view of this, okay, that we can actually zoom in. So you can see this this shape within the NIA boundary, and this is the boundary of the carbon landscape itself. So it starts up here in the Wigan flashes. We've got this corridor that comes down through Wigan, through the Abram flashes, Paddington flash, and then we move across onto the mosslands. So up here in Wigan, we've got Astley Moss, and then as we come down here, I'm just going to switch this aerial photography on, and then hopefully you can see this very recognizable shape, this sort of triangle. I always look for this when I'm trying to zoom in on the map. It helps me to orientate myself. So this is Little Walden Moss. It was up until a few years ago a peat extraction site, and this is now a restoration site. It's a Lancashire Wildlife Trust reserve, and they're doing some amazing work to restore this back to a functioning lowland raised bog. And then you've got just next door the smaller site of Cadishead Moss. So as we come down down through the landscape, we find ourselves down at Risley Moss. We've got Holcroft up here. Apologies, these sites are not actually showing on the map with a boundary. We haven't got all these boundaries actually on the map. We come down here, you can see Rixton Moss, which is a local wildlife site, and eventually we get right down to the southwest corner of the carbon landscape, and it actually includes Woolston Eyes, and a bit further west along the Mersey we've got Paddington Meadows, and I think this is the most westerly of all the sites is the Twiggeries, another Warrington local wildlife site. Okay, so to come on now to the citizen science surveys themselves, we launched the project in 2017, so it's been running for just over 3 years. We've basically got 9 different surveys which cover a range of species, but the thing that links these all together is that they are all sort of potentially, they all quite endangered species. They're either priority or protected. We're doing surveys for willow tits, breeding wetland birds, watervoles, farmland birds, both in the winter and the breeding season. We're also doing plant surveys, dragonflies, bitterns, and non-breeding wetland birds. So the thing that these all have in common is that they are structured surveys. They have a sort of a repeatable and tested methodology. So the idea behind them is that as we collect data across the landscape, we'll be able to repeat these surveys year after year, and the data that we collect will be comparable. So in 10 years time, we hope that these will still be running. We will be able to sort of compare the results with the first year of the project and see how the habitat restoration work, what effect that has had on species numbers and distribution. So we've currently got over 70 voluntary recorders taking part in the surveys. This was a challenge that I set, but nobody's taken it up so far, is to actually go out and do all 9 surveys in a year. But the highest we've got at this stage is one person has managed to do 6 of these different surveys in the space of a year. Okay, so the key, one of the key ones is the winter farmland bird survey, and the aim of this is to monitor the abundance and distribution of farmland birds across the landscape. And also what we do, the volunteers actually go out, they record the crop types that are growing in each of the fields, so we can look to see what the preferences are for birds, you know, in terms of crop preferences. So I'm sure, as you'll be aware, you know, farmland birds have undergone a massive decline in this country over the last 50 years, and this has been driven mainly by agricultural intensification. So we've got things like farmers, you know, switching from planting cereal crops in the spring to planting in the autumn. So that means the stubble gets ploughed up, and there's nothing for the birds to feed on. And this has been identified as one of the biggest causes of farmland bird decline, is basically lack of food to help them survive over the winter. Another issue that of this autumn cereal planting is that lapwings, which nest on the ground, they like to have a good view around them. By the time it gets to spring and they're ready to start nesting, any crops that have been sown in the autumn will have become too high basically for the lapwings to want to use that field, so they tend to abandon these fields, you know. So if we look at a couple of species, yellowhammer You can see that's undergone really significant declines of over 50%. Skylark has declined by 58% between 69 and 2008, and it's been estimated that that equates to the loss of about 4 million individual birds. So it is really, you know, biodiversity loss on an absolutely massive scale. So if we have a look here in terms of the species, these are the target species for the survey. So they are still pretty much all found locally. But what you'll notice is you'll probably be familiar with the birds of conservation concern, where species are classified as either red, amber, or green list. So if you look at the number of species that are on this list, that are on the red list, it really is quite striking. And there are quite a significant number on the amber list as well. Very few species, there's 1 or 2 species that are on the green list, but this was last updated in 2015. So we know from recent information that species like chaffinch and greenfinch are also have undergone really significant declines just in the last 5 years. So unfortunately, these are likely that there is a possibility that the one or both of these could potentially just go straight onto the red list the next time the assessment is carried out, which will be in 2 years' time. But they will almost certainly go onto the amber list. So clearly does give a great deal of cause for concern. Yeah, 1 or 2 species are still doing well. You know, barn owls seem to have done pretty well in recent years, partly as a result of nest box provision. But overall, the picture doesn't look that great. So you can see why it's so important that we monitor these species. So as any of you who take part in wildlife surveys will know, the weather can be a bit of a problem. And we had basically everything thrown at us at the start of the project. So the autumn of 2017 was incredibly wet. Now that actually worked in the birds' favour, because when I went out onto Chat Moss in Salford in autumn 2017 to start preparations for the first surveys, I came across this field with this crop growing in it, and I was really puzzled. I didn't have a clue as to what it was. It turned out to be canary grass, and it was being grown for the first time that year in quite a few fields across. I think this is actually on Earlham Moss. So what happened that autumn was that the torrential rain, basically, as you can see, clearly this field really wants to be a mossland. It doesn't want to be agricultural land. And you can see from the pools of water that the farmer was unable to harvest the crop that year, which was great news for the local birds, as we'll see in a few minutes. So we then went to the other extreme. The following summer, I'm sure you'll all remember the long hot summer of 2018, incredibly dry. So all this mossland that's normally pretty boggy and squelchy, it all dried up. And what that meant was that the farmers were actually then able to replow these fields and plant winter cereal, which wasn't good news for the birds, because it meant over that winter they didn't have too much food. But then things turned around again. Autumn 2018 was very wet, and as a result, the farmers were able to harvest the crop, but they had to leave the stubble because the fields was too wet to plough up the stubble and plant the autumn crops. So again, that was good news for the birds. So this was amazing photo of one of these fields of canary grass that was taken by Dave Steele the same winter. And in this field there was a flock of over 1,000 finches, an absolutely incredible sight. And those of you who are sort of good on your bird ID, you'll be able to spot there's quite a lot of goldfinches in here. You can see the chaffinches with the white wing bars, and somewhere down here there's a few bramblings as well. So it was quite an incredible sight, this. And this crop really sustained the birds through the winter. So what we've done is we've achieved very good survey coverage over the last 3 winters. In total, we've covered 31 kilometre squares. So this involves each volunteer going out twice in the winter. And if you've ever walked around a 1 kilometre square, it's a fairly significant area if you're surveying it thoroughly. So you're looking at 4 to 5 hours, so in terms of volunteer hours, this was really starting to clock up. So here we've got a map that shows where the skylarks and yellowhammers were recorded, and you've got this this is the core area of the mosslands in Salford and Wigan. Between you've got the M62 here, and you've got the East Lancs Road to the north. But we come down here around sort of Warrington, we did get a few squares were covered in the Warrington area as well. Okay, so what the survey actually involves is we supply the volunteers with a map. They go round, they mark on all the field boundaries, and then they actually send this back to us at the record centre. We put this into our database, and as you'll see later, we actually then have an online version of this map that the volunteers use to input their data. So what they do is they basically record all the habitats, the crops growing in the fields, what sort of boundaries there are, whether there's hedgerows, trees, or ditches, etc. So we get a really good understanding of each individual field, and then from year on year we can monitor how the crops change. So one of these fields, for example, I think it was this one down here, it did have canary grass in it one winter, and then the following winter it had the autumn sown cereal in it. Okay, I just wanted to quickly touch on the Wetland Bird Survey. So as you know, the BTO run the National Wetland Bird Survey. So we thought to ourselves, we didn't really want to duplicate what the BTO are already doing. Obviously, sites like Worston Eyes already get very good coverage from the volunteers down there on monthly webs counts that have been taking place since the 1970s. So we thought to ourselves, there's really no point in trying to duplicate that. But what we did do is we had a look at some of the smaller sites which weren't being covered at the time. We did find 1 or 2 where we recruited some volunteers to go out and do surveys. One of these was Amberswood Common, and we had quite a pleasant surprise there, because the volunteer found quite nice little flocks of pochard on the lake there. And whilst these numbers, they might not seem particularly large, if you actually compare the dates, on 9th December, there were 19 pochard on Amberswood Common Lake, but there were only 22 in total across the whole of the carbon landscape. So this is a species, whose numbers, the wintering population has declined massively. And down at Worston Eyes, they'll find that they get very few birds nowadays compared to the big flocks of, sort of 30, 40 years ago. So it just goes to show how, the numbers were higher in January of that year, but there was still a significant percentage of them on this lake. And then what we did was we approached the BTO and we reached an agreement with them. So all of our carbon landscape wetland bird surveyors registered as webs counters with the BTO. So they're continuing to do the survey with the BTO, and they're actually using the BTO's online system to submit their data. And we've got an agreement whereby we can access the data. So we're able to sort of look at the importance of individual sites across the carbon landscape. Yeah, bitterns. Some people don't believe they exist, but we have been carrying out regular bittern surveys, winter and breeding. This is Bryn Marsh in the Wigan Flashes. This photo was taken by one of the volunteers during his breeding season survey. We've had no success, no booming bitterns found during the breeding season. We've not had a great deal of success with finding them in winter either. But ironically, what tends to happen is that they will turn up on days when we're not doing surveys, as is the luck. So so this was just to prove that they do actually exist. This one was photographed again, Bryn Marsh, the photo we just looked at. This one was photographed flying over on the morning of our survey, and we were doing the survey. It was like a late afternoon dust survey, and we didn't pick this up in the survey. Similarly, at Paddington Flash, this bird was photographed in September 2019, and when we did the surveys later that year, I think we did actually detect one bird. But I've just been looking at the Woolston Eyes reports for this 3-year period, and I think there's only 1 year when they've actually recorded bittern at Woolston Eyes. So that was back in 2019. So they are quite, they are very elusive birds, no doubt about that. Okay, so here's a little just to give people a little exercise to do. If you've got a piece of paper, I'd like you to just jot down, you can just put the initials of the species, and then I want you to put yes or no. So is the marsh tit rarer than a willow tit? Or is the marsh tit more common than a willow tit? So the question might appear slightly confusing. So if you think marsh tit is rarer than a willow tit, you put yes. If you think it's more common than a willow tit, you put no. There we go. And I've sorted them in order of population size. So you can see that marsh tit, 28,500 pairs. Willow tit is only 2,750. So for every 1 pair of willow tits, we've got 10 pairs of marsh tits. But some species, that you would think were quite rare, like Chetty's warbler, red kite, they're actually more common now than willow tits. And the only species that I've got on that list, there's 3 there that are actually rarer than willow tit, but not by a massive amount. And this is a population estimate from 2016. So the likelihood is, it was published in 2020. The likelihood is that figure is even lower now. So it could be down, with the Dartford warblers and the firecrests. So yeah, we started carrying out willow tit surveys in 2018, and we've been doing them every year since, although obviously for understandable reasons last year we collected very little data. The RSPB decided that because willow tits were becoming so rare and they were becoming difficult to detect on the BTO's breeding bird survey, it was becoming very difficult to sort of monitor them. So they decided to launch a national survey in 2019, and the aims of the survey were basically to look at where the current distribution is and try to establish an updated national population estimate. So we shared all the data that we collected on our citizen science surveys, and that's gone in for the national analysis. and we're hoping that the latest information is that some information should be published later this year. But in terms of our results on the citizen science project, we covered 41 kilometre squares, 12 2K squares. We got a minimum of 46 territories, max of 55, and the highest density was actually in the Wigan Flashes, where there was about 12 territories. But I'm not including Worston Eyes in this figure, as you'll see shortly. Okay. And then what we do every year with this data is that we supply it to the Rare Breeding Birds panel, who's been monitoring the species since 2010. So you can go onto their website and you can download the annual reports, apart from the most recent one, which is published in British Birds magazine. So if you have a look, I'm showing here the sort of figures for 2017 to 2019. And in the final column, you've got a population estimate. So, Cheshire, we're looking at about 50 pairs, we reckon. Greater Manchester's about 125 pairs, which is interesting because, Greater Manchester is obviously a much smaller county than Cheshire, but it's primarily due to all the brownfield sites that we have, the former coal mining sites, which are like the Wigan Flashes, Amberswood Common, which are really good for willow tits. And then Lancashire and Merseyside combined. It's a similar sort of figure to Cheshire. So when we add those up, we've got sort of 225 pairs, we estimate, in the northwest. And it's important to understand that these basically function as a single population. So we have to look, if we're looking in terms of conservation action, we really need to be looking at the whole of the northwest and working together to conserve the species. But it's interesting. You look at, we haven't got the figures for Yorkshire and County Durham for 2019 as yet, but in 2018, Greater Manchester had the second highest population of any county in England. So clearly, an important area. When you combine it with Cheshire and Lancashire, we're getting close to 10% of the national population. Okay, so come on to Watervoles now. We know this is a species which is critically endangered. It's undergone massive declines. Some of you may have taken part in this survey back in 2008 to 2011, which was the Northwest Lowlands Watervole survey, and that was really our baseline. So when we started looking at the start of the project as to where we were going to survey for watervoles, we basically looked at all the sites where they were detected during the Northwest Lowlands survey, and we have targeted all of those sites. We haven't covered them all as yet, so we're looking for sort of more volunteers to get involved this spring. But what was interesting was we had a pretty disastrous training workshop at Amberswood Common in September 2018, and the night before the survey it rained really heavily and the water level rose in all the ditches. So if there were any field signs, they were all washed away. We couldn't find anything, and I took Tony Parker's advice, and who runs these workshops for us, and we decided, right, next spring we're going to do the workshops at Risley Moss. And we were, pleased that we've found, every year we've done them at Risley Moss. We've always found field signs of watervole on the site, which is a credit to all the restoration work that's gone on there. But what's really interesting is that at these sites as well in Wigan, our volunteers have also found field signs, and Bickershaw is one of these sites where there's been a lot of restoration work going on. Similarly, Amberswood Common, there's been some bog restoration going on there. So these are, it's proving that the habitat restoration is starting to make sites more suitable, and the species, it does seem to be able to expand from local populations into new areas if you make the habitat right for them. One of the other surveys that we do is dragonflies. This is an amazing site on chat moss, crocs and peat pools. There was a survey done by Dave Steele in June 2018, and he recorded almost 1,000 individuals from 11 species. So some really impressive totals here. We had sort of like black-tailed skimmer is a relatively new species to Greater Manchester, so to get a count of 75 was really impressive. But looking at some of the other numbers, I mean, not surprising given that this is mossland. He recorded 500 black darters, which is pretty impressive. But another survey that Dave did was along the Glaze Brook at Little Warden. And as you're probably aware, that's basically the boundary between Warrington and Salford, runs down the middle of the brook. And on his May 2018 survey, he obviously timed it just right for the key emergence time. And he recorded over 500 of these along a 400-meter stretch of the brook. So I think we can count these as being half in Warrington and half in Salford, because they were probably flying backwards and forwards across the brook. And all the data from the dragonfly surveys is shared with the British Dragonfly Society. So in this case, it's gone to the South Lancashire recorder. Okay, yeah, we're also doing plant surveys as well. So I think the last time I checked on this, we got up to about 327 species. Few of the sort of more interesting finds, and again, all that data is shared with the vice county recorders, depending on which one they're in. Yeah, so one of the things that we've been doing with the project, the way in which we sort of recruited the 70+ volunteers, is through running a series of workshops. So without the support of these key people, we really wouldn't have been able to deliver this project. So they played a really important role, and I've just listed there the various trainers for the different workshops, and they've done an absolutely fantastic job for the project. And we've got a lot of volunteers going out, infused and trained up to be able to do the surveys. And Walston Heights Conservation Group, they helped us with this breeding wetland birds survey that we do. It's using an RSPB methodology that they've been using at Walston Heights for quite a few years. I must admit that took some time for me to get my head around the methodology, but thanks to the guys at Walston Heights, that explained it to us how it all works. Yeah. So unfortunately, due to the lockdown last spring, we had to cancel all the workshops that we had planned. So what we're aiming to do, fingers crossed, is this spring is to rerun these workshops. So this is basically what we've got planned. I'm not too sure about the Walston Heights one, to be honest. We're going to need to talk to the volunteers there. It's a little bit too early, but based on what the government has announced, with the rule of 6 coming in again from the 29th of March, we are hoping to run Watervoles surveys at Risley Moss, but I think we're going to have to do part of that on Zoom. I think classroom sessions are out of the question at the moment, but we're hoping to do some on-site training, with small groups, and these are the other workshops that we've got planned. Yeah, just a few stats. So I won't go into all of this, but the key figures, I think, down the bottom here would please any record centre manager. 16,000+ species records submitted, and the volunteers have actually clocked up over 1,500 hours of survey time over all these projects. Bear in mind, these figures are from January last year, so despite the lockdowns, we, you know, the actual figures now are a bit higher than that. And so what I'd like to sort of come on to in a minute is basically say, you know, there's lots of opportunities for you to get involved with the surveys. It doesn't matter if you don't need to be experienced. You know, if you're a relative beginner, there's lots of training to, you know, bring you up to speed with, improve your ID skills, teach you how to do the surveys. And so I think perhaps we'll take some questions first, and then we'll come on to the next section where I'll explain how you can get involved with the surveys. But I'd also like to give a credit to Paul Barrington. He's the GMLRC data manager, and as we'll see later, you know, he's built this carbon landscape data module from scratch that allows the volunteers to submit their data, and it's what Swift was based on. I'm pleased to see that Record are now starting to use it as well. Yeah, so this is the GMLRC website, GM Wildlife, and you can see over here, that's my photo of a kingfisher, by the way, taken at Worston Eyes. So I was pleased that Paul chose that for the website. So you've got all the details of the surveys on here. These are what we were looking at, and basically you can go on to any one of these and you can download the survey handbook, which explains how to do the survey, and then the various recording forms that you would use. Okay, so that's all available there. But this is the clever bit. It's all hidden away behind the scenes. So you need to come on and register first. So if you click on that register button and fill in your details, click submit, you'll get an email back with an activation link. Check your junk if you don't receive it, because it often goes into junk. But once you've set up your account, you can just log in here. Okay, and this opens up the whole new world that you'll recognize from Swift. So what I can do here is, first of all, if I want to request a survey, sorry, I've jumped a step there. I do need to log in to do this. I go to the view allocations map. Okay. And over here, I've got a map of the carbon landscape and the GM wetlands. So say, for example, I want to do a willow tit survey. I just select willow tit there. And then I'm going to maximize the map. Okay. And you can see that these are basically all the 1 kilometer survey squares across the map. So green is available, brown is taken, and the ones you can see in purple I've allocated to myself. Now, I'm not actually doing all these surveys myself. I've just reserved them basically because some of them we know they're well covered, and we don't want people spending their time covering these when we want them to go out and, you know, do some of the green ones. So you can see at the moment we've got the carbon landscape coming down here into Warrington. I'll just switch the aerial on. So we've got Worston Eyes. We've removed those squares because, you know, the Worston Eyes Conservation Group are covering them really well. But what I really wanted to show you was, if you look down the bottom left of the screen, you can see it's saying Great Manchester Wetlands. So we're extending the carbon landscape surveys this year to the whole of the GM wetlands. So you'll see that we've now got this large area of Warrington which is now within the wetlands. Sorry, I've gone outside there's the boundary there. Okay, so we're going up to Winnick. You'll have to, I'm going to switch off the aerial for a minute because I think it's easier to see without it on. Yeah, we're going all the way up to Croft and to Colchith. So what I was going to ask this evening, it also goes into St Helens as well, to the east of Newton Willows, and right the way up here. I've lost my bearings there. I think we're still in St Helens. So what I was going to ask is if you know of any sort of squares within this area which would be good to do any of those surveys, then please get in touch, because you know we really want to get some coverage in this area, and at the moment it's showing no allocations because we've only just we're only just in the process of planning the GM wetlands surveys. But of course all the carbon landscape surveys are still available as well, and I think we can come over this side as well, can't we? We're still in Warrington here, aren't we? Oh no, that's Trafford, sorry. Yeah, we're still in Warrington down here. So it's potentially quite a big area. But if I just go back to the login button here, yeah, so when I click on this button, it says My Surveys. This is basically how you access all of your survey squares, and you'll see your allocations in here. And in terms of my own, I did some surveys in Rochdale for Willow Tits. I knew I wasn't going to find any, unfortunately. But this is how you input your data basically through here. So you can create a new survey form. If I have a look at this one that I did last year, this was literally the day before the lockdown, so I was really fortunate to get this one done. And it is just basically a replica of the paper form that you take out into the field. It's got all the survey information. So if I just look at this one here as an example, again, this is using the map app. So it's all really clever stuff that Paul has devised. And that was my first survey point, you see. So you're basically using the map app to put your survey point on, and then you're inputting your data. You're recording habitat, and if you've got a willow tit, how it was whether it was located by playback, how long it took to react, and all the information. So it all gets input, other birds, primary canopy, and so on, so that all feeds into the database, and as soon as you've input your records, we've got access to it. But then the other thing you can do is you can run reports, so I think this is a bit slow now. Paul's going to do a bit of tweaking to speed this up. But you can basically run reports. You can download all your data, and I can run custom reports for each of the surveys, so I can follow up and see, who submitted their data, who hasn't, so I can chase them up. Yeah, so we've got over to the reporting here. So in terms of reports, I can run a report on the dragonflies, and I just download all the dragonfly survey data from there. And this is going straight into our database as well, so it's similar to Swift, because basically Swift is based on this. This was the prototype, shall we say. And so we've got here yeah, basically, you know, all the records from the Dragonfly surveys. So the last thing I was just going to show you on this, yeah, was the other thing that you can do that you'll be familiar with now with Swift, is this custom query builder, where you can add in whichever fields from the database you want to form a custom query. You can select your taxon group, whatever you want to download records for. You can put in a date range, and then you can put in a bounding box as well, so you can extract your records from a particular area, you know. So it's great for the volunteers because it means they can access all their survey data, and it's great for me as well. You know, Paul's produced this wonderful report that gives me all the volunteer hours, you know, so I can, when I'm doing my quarterly reports, I can actually see how many hours the volunteers spent out in the field doing each survey. So it's quite, you know, it is impressive stuff. Yeah.